911, what are you reporting?
I got a strange going on out here. Something just killed my dog.
Something killed your dog?
My dog went flying through the air over the tree. I don't know how it did it.
Okay.
Damn it, I'm really confused. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence, and he was dead when she hit the ground. I didn't see any cars. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence.
What are you reporting?
We got someone or something crawling around out here.
Did you see what it was?
It was standing up. I'm out here looking through the window now and I don't see anything. I don't want to go outside. Jesus Christ, you better...
Sure.
See ya!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
All right, folks, I want to welcome our guest to the show. It's David Wilbanks, author and researcher. Welcome to the show, David.
How you doing?
I'm good, man. I've been excited to talk to you. So let's get right into it. Let's talk about this Bigfoot thing. What got you interested in the subject of Bigfoot and sent you on this path that you've been on for the last couple of decades?
Okay. Well, this will be for people that have not watched any of my other interviews and stuff, because this is the same story. But basically, back in I was born in 1967, but my mother back during the late 60s and very early 70s worked for a veterinarian near our hometown, and he was interested in anything to do with the outdoors, very much an outdoorsman. He was a veterinarian by the name of Dr. Lewis Stiles, and he had a book that was written by Roger Patterson at his house after they moved down to Broken Bow, which was his hometown. He became a federal veterinarian and moved down there. But he had that book, Do Abominable Snowmen in America Really Exist? And he had done some corresponding with Roger Patterson back in the earlier mid-'60s before the Patterson film. And he had, I don't know if Roger gave him the book or he purchased the book, but as a kid, I was just enthralled with that. I was probably looking at the pictures in that before I knew how to read. Anyway, and I was just interested in it from then. And then a little later on, I'd go down there and he would tell about, a Bigfoot sighting that happened down around Broken Bow or something. And I was just like, wow, we got Bigfoot in Oklahoma too, And of course, growing up, we had book clubs at the grade school then. And anytime the book list come in, if there was anything about Bigfoot or UFOs or just anything mystery type stuff, I would just, talk my parents into letting me get that. So all of my life, I've been interested in the Bigfoot subject because of all the mysteries that there were. There's the Loch Ness Monster, such as that. That seemed the most feasible. And I love the woods, and I love a good mystery. And Bigfoot's about the neatest mystery of the woods I think you could come up with. But fast forward several years, mid-'90s came around, and I was a young adult then, and I would go out in the woods and look for evidence of this creature. I started taking reports and such as that. And rest is just history, I guess. But the earliest days was a very close family friend, that Dr. Stiles, that introduced me to that subject through that book he had,
Well, in no very, very short time, you were sort of associated with the BFRO, and I know you got to investigate some things while you were dealing with them in the early years. Is there anything that stuck out to you during those times with the BFRO? Any cases that you got to investigate that really stuck out for you as being incredible or something that was very credible to you?
Yeah. Now, keep in mind, I was never an actual, I guess, card-carrying member of the BFRO. I was very briefly, when I say very briefly, I'm talking about just over one summer, from July through maybe September. But the gentleman that was the main Oklahoma contact for the BFRO at that time was a gentleman named Roger Roberts, who was a private investigator by trade. And anyway, I got acquainted with him, and we investigated 2 actual sightings of a Bigfoot together, and another we went down into some different areas down in southeast Oklahoma as well. But we investigated one that really stands out because it has become kind of infamous as the casino footage that you've heard about. And I received that through an email that if I wanted to go to this casino area is on native land up in northwest Oklahoma, just right there on the prairie. And at first I was like, oh man, that's not a good place for a Sasquatch. I said, that's right there on the prairie. There's not much woodland. And I didn't realize at the time it is very close to where the supposed Chicken Man, have you heard of that, by El Reno up there? It's not very far from where that, was reported. And I wasn't even going to drive because that's a good, 3 hours from my house or so. And he said, well, and this would have been Matt at that time. He says, well, they say they've got it on surveillance video. And I was like, well, that puts a whole different thing to it. I really still didn't think there's much a chance because if you've looked into this subject for very long, you'll know there's a whole lot of hope and a whole lot of disappointment, and such as that. I've been doing it a while, so you may have too, so you know what I'm talking about. So what I did, I got my stuff together and I drove up there and I met with a gentleman from the tribe there earlier in the day. I got there first and he showed me around the area and all that. And later that evening, about dark, Roger Roberts, he arrived there from Tulsa, and a friend of his, which I cannot remember his friend's name. His friend wasn't really a Bigfoot guy. He was just, coming along, just mildly interested, I guess. But they led us into the security room where they have all the televisions where they monitor, the cameras from both inside and outside the casino. And if they keep them up, there's a release form in there with my name on it and Roger's name and this other guy before they let us in there. So they let us watch this video. And what they had is there was a grease trap out behind the casino, which is right on this really huge, plowed field. And at the far end of that plowed field, you had some woods. Pretty, I'm not going to guess how many acres of woodland there was, but it was pretty good patch of woods, and there's a lot of natural springs in there. So what you saw at first, well, there's this grease trap, which looks like a dumpster, but it had on the very top of it a smaller square lid where they would lift it up and put the leftover cooking grease in. And it also had a light pole right beside it that kind of come up and bent down over it. If we ever meet in person, I'll show you pictures of that. I've got pictures of it somewhere. But anyway, and this was footage that was captured after dark. Okay. So it was kind of grainy, that kind of night vision looking surveillance footage. But the first thing you would notice is, if you're looking, it would have been on the west side of the casino. You see on the parking lot beside, you see at first what looked like a little, something glowing. And what I thought it was, and here's the only thing that me and Roger come to a different conclusion on, and it doesn't affect the story at all, was I thought it was some of the other street lamps reflecting off the top of its head. And Roger believes it was eye shine, which either way, that's the first thing you noticed was that kind of glow approaching. And it was smaller. But as it got closer to the proximity where the surveillance camera was recording right directly at that grease trap, it just seemed like it just kind of materialized into the frame, not supernaturally, just coming into view. And it took a few steps and leaned over to place its hands on top of the grease trap. And that's where what we saw ended, was right there. We didn't see anything like it prying on the lid or anything like that. but we seen it. You see the little bit of a glow there, which I interpreted as the reflection off the top of its head. Rod interpreted as eye shine. Takes a few steps, leans over to put his hands on top of the grease trap. Now, what makes that really credible and rules out to me a guy in a monkey suit was we went out and it was right under that light pole. We were able to measure up that light pole and determine its height was over 9 feet tall, even in a slightly stooped position. And I still remember looking over at Roger and going like, well, I guess that rules out a guy in a monkey suit, doesn't it? You know, so up until that time, I was very interested in the Bigfoot mystery, and believe I was about a high percentage that they probably were real. But at that one there, I still remember making the other comment to Roger was, well, they are real, aren't they? Now, what did it look like? I've seen reenactments of this on I think, was it Finding Bigfoot or some show tried to do a reenactment of it. And it's kind of this blocky, stumbling looking, heavy built, reenactment. That's not what it looked like. It's very tall and lanky. And in the consistent way I've always described it is like, imagine an NBA basketball player and covered with hair. It was that kind of build, very tall, and it just it moved in a very flowing fashion, just like liquid, just moved right into the frame, and that was it. And they played it back for us several times. But and there were other sightings that were leading up to that too. We heard that there was some people sitting in a parked bus outside that saw one of them. There were people in that community that were seeing them as well. So now, other than the video, we didn't actually lay eyes on it. Now, I listened to an audio interview that was from like 2009, and I believe it was Roger Roberts, but also another gentleman named Alton Higgins, who is a wildlife biologist. That I think on that deal, Alton caught sight of one of them down there and described it size like a big black Brahma bull up on its hind legs or so. And somehow that sounds even scarier, because that puts the size into perspective for sure, But we spent, I can't remember exactly how many times I returned to that area, but it was several where we would go out and set up in the woods and just listen, and we heard some whistles and whoops that I could not identify with any animal that I'd heard of, that we attributed to that being most likely what it was.
When you guys got to see the video and you only saw these couple of seconds of it, was that all they had, or was that all that they showed you? Did you understand?
That's all that, if there was, that's all that we saw. And I'm so to say, how many seconds was it that we saw it? It was 5 to 7 seconds probably of video. If they had more, they didn't show us any of the other, but that's they showed us, I guess, the main part of it. So I don't know how much more they might have had. Curious if they did, but I just feel very fortunate that we were actually able to see that.
Yeah, because so often I think there's stories that build up around people seeing videos or pictures of things that people don't release, and there's no proof, right? You as an investigator got to go in and actually lay eyes on it and see it, because I think there's a lot. I talk about it often on the show. I think there's tons of people out there that have these things on trail cams. I talked to one of my listeners, I don't know, last week, that reached out to me and said, hey, I'm trying to get with my neighbor because he's been dealing with these things on his property for years, and he's got them on trail cams, but he won't let anybody see it, And I'm like, well, I get that on some level, because we sit around on shows like this and Monday Morning Quarterback, what people put out there is, what they've seen or what they believe. So I get that on many levels, but I'm glad that you actually got to see that, because I've heard about that and I've heard that story, but to actually put somebody in the room with the video that actually got to see it is a pretty neat thing. I know you've had experiences. Go ahead.
funny story about that casino footage. That the rumors that I was seeing on the internet concerning that is actually what inspired me to start my YouTube channel, Bigfoot and More, because for the past, like, since about 2003, I've been primarily researching in a particular area down in southeast Oklahoma with a friend of mine, and it's just been for my own, knowledge, I guess you would say. But I was seeing so many things, like the government came in and threatened the tribe, took the video, and the men in black showed up and this and that. And I wouldn't know anything about any of that stuff, but I felt compelled to do a YouTube channel and at least explain what I saw there. And to the best of my knowledge, the word of that had become pretty common knowledge around that area. And there were people coming up trespassing on the tribal property, just making a nuisance of themselves. And I remember probably the last night that I was there, we were down in this one area by this field, and just a whole line of cars. This was at night. A whole line of cars started coming in, full of teenagers and stuff, whooping and yelling. And anyway, I think the tribe just stopped to it and said no more. That's the most simple explanation I could think of. Because I wouldn't want people coming on my property making a nuisance like that either,
Yeah, you tend to go back to Occam's razor, right? It makes more sense that the tribe got tired of things like that, other than the government and the men in black coming in and taking the footage away. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But the tribe not wanting that around the property, I can certainly get. So I know you've been in the woods for. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. It wasn't anything important.
I'm a good editor, so it'll be like this never happened. So I want to get to some of your experiences in the woods yourself, right? You've seen this video in the casino, and that kind of puts you in the mind frame of this could be a real thing. What have you experienced out in the woods for yourself that has changed your mind about these things?
Well, nothing to change my mind, but add to it. Well, actually, a couple of, it would have been last summer, I guess. Actually laid eyes on one personally. I was doing a solo camp, and which I do quite often, actually. Not because I don't like other people with me. It's just with my job, I'm self-employed, and when I get a chance that I can get away, I just up and go generally. So it's kind of harder to plan ahead sometimes. But I just got to this area, and it was dusk. There was still daylight left, but I was getting my stuff out of my truck, and I noticed something caught my eye. And the first thought was a tree stump or something, but it was across a creek from me, probably 70, 80 feet, something like that. But it was a good distance. But then when I turned around and looked back, it wasn't a tree stump. It was a Bigfoot. And it wasn't very big. It was 4.5, 5 feet tall. And it was standing right at the edge of this really thick foliage brush, if you will, on the other side of the creek. As soon as my eyes locked on it, it shot off through the woods. Okay, it just, was gone. Now, my recollection of it, it was covered in a grayish black hair. I couldn't make out facial features. All that I remember in that, that very brief moment is it had a very dark face, and it took off on its hind legs like a person would, but just very quick, and it didn't make noise as it went off through that brush. It was just, almost ghost-like the way the silence with which it moved. And after it had gone off into the woods, I heard vocalizations from either side further into the woods to where it went into. And, looking back, I'm like going, I wonder if that was a juvenile and that was its parents gripping at it for being careless. I mean, I don't know. But there was that, and that's most recent. Now go back to 2003. brought me to an area down in southeast Oklahoma in the Kiamichi Mountains that I spend a lot of time at. I haven't this summer. It's been over 100 degrees every day since June, so that takes all the fun out of it. But 2003, I had got a report from a man who breaks horses for a living, and he would go down into this area and ride horses. And he was by himself, and one of these Bigfoot walked out in the road. He said about 50 yards ahead of him with his back to him, walked the road, and then it looked over its shoulder, saw him, and ran back into the woods. So I got a report of that, went and talked to the gentleman personally. It was a neighbor that was a friend of his that actually told me about the incident, and I got in contact with him. He told me, right where it was. This neighbor friend of mine went with me down there to show me how to get into the area, and I stayed the night. Nothing happened. That was in, no, I'm wrong on the year. That would have been late summer of 2002, because the incident I'm about to share was in March of 2003. So fast forward to spring, which is March 2003. Me and a good friend of mine named Brian Baker, which, kind of a research partner, if you put it that way, and longtime friend too, went down there. And I like to fish the creeks, catch our dinner. I love to eat fresh caught fish, fried on a skillet, right there in a campfire. But while we were fishing that day when we got there, it's kind of a drizzly day, spring, a lot of cloud cover. Something was pacing us in the brush beside the creek in front of us, and it would, step with us, and it would whistle once in a while. And my first thought was, some local hillbillies or something out here, following us, seeing if we're up to no good, or maybe they're up to no good, and seeing if we're armed or not, which we were. But I made the comment, I was like, well, these creatures are supposed to whistle. So, and it didn't sound like coming from the lips. It sounded like a deeper whistle, more like it's coming from deeper down. I really can't, kind of like if you've got a teapot and it starts to steam, and when the steam starts to come out, kind of like that, but deeper. Okay. And not real long and drawn out, but we heard that. So late that night, and we didn't sleep in a tent. What I generally do is I'll bring a tarp along and make like a lean-to out of a tarp and put our cots under it. And after midnight, we were both asleep, me and Brian were, and we were awakened after midnight by this loud crash, like something striking a tree right outside of our camp. So we got up and looked, and at the base of this big tree, just maybe 20 foot from where we were sleeping, was a large rock, probably 25 or 30 pounds, that had been thrown with force against that tree. And you could see, about 4 foot up the tree, where this rock had impacted the tree, made a dent in it, and then hit the ground under it. So, yeah, I could pick the rock up, move it out of the way, but I could not throw that rock. So what would be the explanation? It had to be something with great strength and opposable thumbs, in my view. And I don't know of any person that could have picked up a rock of that size and done that. And I've had people say, well, that was aggression. I said, no, aggression would have been throwing it right on top of it. My impression was that was it, letting us know it was there, and it would rather us not be. So, and the next morning, daylight, we started doing like circles around the camp, trying to find evidence of footprints. And I found a place in the woods with indentations. And keep in mind that the ground in the forest here is covered in a layer of pine needles. So you won't get detail, but you'll get impressions. But it had crossed this little trail, which had a mud puddle in it. And if you've read my book, Kiamichi Bigfoot, I've got pictures of this mud puddle there with the little dam I built around the footprint so we could drain the water out of it. So if you've got my book, it has all this and the cast afterwards. But from the edge of this puddle, you could see what looked like a heel print that had water in it, but the rest of whatever was there was concealed under the water. So what I did is I got some sticks and rocks, and I built a little dam around where I figured this track would be if it was there. Then we got a roll of paper towels, and very carefully would just lay these paper towels into that print and lift them out as they soaked up the water till we got enough water out of there to make a cast. And it's not greatly detailed, but it's not bad either. And it's definitely a humanoid footprint, in the shapes, that same wide, flat Sasquatch, what we recognize as Sasquatch footprint. Now, lengthwise, it wasn't massively long. It was like 12 inches long, but it's that wide, flat look, and it did correspond right in line with the impressions that went through the woods, which would have been a good vantage point for something to have thrown that rock that hit that tree. So that was very interesting. In that area there, I've had several other things happen down there. So I'm going to stop and let you ask a question if you want to. I don't want to just keep rambling.
No, the more you talk, the better the show is. I do want to talk about some of the other experiences, but let's talk a little bit about the evidence, right? That's one of the things that I've been so frustrated about over these last couple of months. I've been so cantankerous with some of the people on the show about why it is that we're in 2022 and we don't have definitive proof that these things are real. And you've been out there, you go out in the woods, I'm an armchair researcher. I do it behind the microphone, talking to people and hiking on my 40 acres of property here where we've heard and seen some really weird things in North Carolina. But I'm not boots on the ground doing this kind of research. So for you, what has been the greatest amount, or what has been the greatest piece of evidence or pieces of evidence that have really convinced you beyond a shadow of a doubt? Obviously, you saw one of these things, so
Yeah, you can't beat that one.
Yeah, right.
You can say what other evidence has been, more compelling, I guess. But
yeah, exactly.
When you actually and I was in disbelief even after that. I'm sitting around, like, even driving home, I'm saying to myself, you actually finally saw one of these things. And I guess what was getting me is I've always thought I would just be like so elated and excited when I finally did that I'd just be beside, but I was surprisingly not overly excited. It was just accepting, like, well, I kind of figured they were out there anyway. But some people say, well, I would be terrified if I saw one. I would be this, and and you were a police officer and stuff, and I think you can agree with me on this. On situations that are like that and others, nobody knows how they're going to react until it happens. And I know the last person I want to be in a dangerous situation with is somebody that's, by God, I tell you, if that was me, this is what I would do. I'm like, no, I know exactly what you do, and I don't want anywhere near you. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I've told the story about being shot at when I was on the streets in Atlanta, and I was the only one running towards the gunfire, and everybody else was running away. And I was like, that's not what they trained us to do in the academy. We're supposed to be the sheepdogs going in to save the sheep. We're not supposed to be running backwards. We're supposed to be running towards the guy that's shooting at us. So, but you find out quickly how people handle high stress situations, and certainly coming face to face with a Bigfoot is one of those moments. So you don't really know what you're going to do, like you said.
I will say this was, several yards away from you. It was across a creek, and it wasn't real big, and it was very quickly. Now, if I'd stepped out on the trail and come face to face with an 8 or 9 foot tall Bigfoot close enough to touch, looking down at me, it might have been a very different reaction. And I've just interviewed a lady, Tanya Kordek, who owns the Bigfoot Museum in Tallahena, a few weeks ago, and I interviewed her. I did a little podcast, and when she started, she had a literal face-to-face with it. And when she started recounting it, she was wiping tears out of her eyes. And I had no doubt that I said, what did you think? She said, I thought it was going to kill me. And I said, did it do anything aggressive or whatever? She said, no, it was just the sheer size of it and stuff. She said, I just knew if it wanted that, there's nothing I could do about it. But it looked at her and turned around, walked back into the woods, you know. And she was obviously traumatized by it. But it inspired her to open up that Bigfoot museum for a place for people to come by and share their experiences and stuff. And by the way, if you're in Tallahena next weekend, September 10, I will be there with another Oklahoma author doing a book signing next Saturday on September 10 with fellow Oklahoma author John Vandeventer. He writes Bigfoot fiction. And so we'll be there then. But I think I chased a rabbit there. Your question. Okay. Where to start? Compelling sightings I've investigated. And this one here, they were talked about it on the documentary on the Travel Channel, Bigfootville I was on. And this was by two off-duty police officers. And they contacted me. Well, one of them, his name was Dan Belda. And unfortunately, he's deceased now. But he sent me an email. I had a website called southernbigfoot.com back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I was getting a lot of reports from people. And this happened up in the river bottoms below the dam of Grand Lake up in the northeast corner of the state up there by Disney, Oklahoma. Him and another officer. Well, Dan was a police officer. His friend was a deputy. And they had been camping down there, and they'd been target practicing, shooting into this berm that was down at the bottom of this mountain there. And they had stopped, and after a while, they were hearing something on the other side of this berm in the leaves. They thought it was an armadillo. And so they think, well, let's shoot that armadillo, you know. And they walk around the side of that berm. And what they were hearing was this Bigfoot was laying on its stomach, scooting up the other side of it so I could look over at them. And when they come around the side, it stood up right in front of them. And you want me to tell you exactly what Dan told me? I said, so what did you do? He said, I screamed like a bitch and ran. Quote. Okay. Now his friend, which his name is Jeff, and they, have you seen Bigfootville? Okay, that's the document was on from back then. His friend froze. It was a deputy, and you know we both been in the academy. How they train you to grab your partner by the back of the shirt and drag them. You know if they didn't. Jeff froze, and Dan said I grabbed him by the back of the collar and just jerked him real hard out of there because he was just in shock, frozen there. They left all of their camping gear down there. The next day, Dan sent some other friends down there to get his stuff. He wouldn't go back. So I met up with him, contacted him. I said, hey, would you take me down there? He said, yeah, but I'm not staying after dark. And he wouldn't. The other guy would not go down there again at all. Matter of fact, when we did Bigfootville and they were down there, that was the first time that the gentleman named Jeff had come back there at all. And if you watch that show, Jeff's acting very scared, and that was real. He really was scared to be down there. But I went down there, and Dan showed us around where it was, and it got close to dark. He left. Now I would like nothing happened that evening when I was down there. But now the next time, and then the next time, the time after that, I went back. Dan would go with me, okay, because he'd kind of got past the initial shock. But one time we was there, and I had my then, she's not my wife now, but was then with me. And we were at that same camp. And on the, it would be on the west side, on the east side of us, there was a mountain went straight up, which was where that berm was at the bottom where Dan and Jeff had their sighting. On the other side, which was to the east, went to the west, went towards the river. Between the river and there is very thick woods, a lot of river cane and stuff. Shined my light around into that river cane and caught some eye shine. Okay. And it was kind of a greenish white eye shine. And I just thought it was a deer. And, but just for kicks, I said, you know what? I'm going to go walk around it and see if I can spook it out. And this was, well after dark. And as I was going around, I got into all this brush, and between me and where that eye shine was, there was a big tree. And Dan and my ex-wife now both started yelling that it had stood up. And then it took off running. It ran by me, but all I caught was a flash of something big going through the woods. But they said it stood up. They saw it from the shoulders up. It had been crouching down in that river cane watching us, and what I'd caught was its eye shine. And they both described, Dan said that's exactly what they had encountered before. And, and I was armed. We were all armed. And Dan said, man, I'm sorry, but if that's me, I'd have emptied my handgun into it. And I'm like, well, one, that's not what I intend to do. And two, if it was wanted to get me, I wouldn't have had a chance. Because it was just, as soon as they started yelling that it stood up, it was shooting through the woods behind me there. So did find some kind of not very good footprints, but, in the leaf litter prints there. And went down there a couple of times after that. Didn't have any other encounters, anything like that. And then the next time would be when we shot Bigfootville. I've got so many of these different things I've investigated. It's hard to pick a few, and I'll pick one that has stood out recently. And this happened down near the town of Antlers. What state are you in, by the way?
I'm in North Carolina.
Oh, okay. So you may not be familiar with a lot of these places I'm talking about then. But down in the northeast part of the state, Pushmataha County, by near a town called Antlers, I got an email from a guy who has a YouTube channel called Livewire, and was talking about having an issue because his family had like 80 acres right at the edge of the woods. They don't allow hunting there. It's just pretty much just woods as it is. But he said he had some pictures of these things on game camera, and he did. They were, to be fair, they're blob squatches because of the distance and stuff, but you can actually go on Livewire, YouTube channel. That's what it's called, Livewire. And you can look through those pictures and see what you think. But what brought his attention to it, that he even done that, was they had bought their little boy one of those little battery cars that they sit in and drive around. And when he got him that, the little boy said, he can't catch me now. And he says, what do you mean? He said, there's a big black man that follows me from the school bus to the house, but he stays in the woods. And, the gentleman's name is Mark Copeland, actually. Thought, well, just kid, his imagination. And then the little boy runs into the living room and said, hey, there's a bear with a white face looking in the window of my bedroom at me. So Mark and the little boy said it was standing up like a person. So Mark put out some game cameras, and his profession is a lot of electronic stuff. He had put out security systems and stuff, and he literally put these security cameras like all around his house facing out towards the woods there. And he got it what appears to be a large Bigfoot creature standing behind a tree looking towards the house. And he got several other things as well that are very mysterious, to say the least. So anyway, I met with him, went to their property, and he met up with me, took me walking in the woods down there, and I found footprints of 3 different sizes out there. Otherwise, 3 different individual Sasquatch in that woods. Most of them were in the leaf litter. I took a cast of one just for the heck of it. And that's a picture of that in my book too. The best picture, the best footprint I found was not real long, but it was in a high line cut. It had stepped in some mud, and the mud had kind of, filled with water. But there's a picture in my book of my foot beside it, and it's that wide, flat, just a pretty good looking track right there. And then the game trails, see what you had when you come into his driveway, you come to a shop building and then his house. And then on the other side of that, right up next to the woods, was his parents' house at the time. And the game trails behind was where I'd find those tracks. And also on that trail, there was a tree there in about 6.5, 7 foot up off the ground, where there was a tree branch where something had grabbed that tree branch and just twisted it and broke it over. Nothing else damaged but that. It's like that was in its way or something. Again, all these things I'm describing, there are pictures of these in the book, in my book, Kiamichi Bigfoot. So, he had a lot of evidence, right there in my opinion of these things coming up. And truth be known, I'm sure he's probably got pictures he has not discovered yet, because he had these things going all the time. And when we were out, I took my son, Elijah, went with me down there, and went off in the woods, and we found a game camera he forgot he had back there in the woods. And so after we had left that day, I got a text, and I'm driving, so I hand the phone over to my son, and he says, "Dad, you might want to pull over." I'm like, "Really?" And I pull over and look at it, and on the game camera, you've got this again. It's not perfect, but you can tell it's like from the waist up, something approached through the woods, and you see head and shoulders of it, and it appears to have on the forehead a white like streak there, exactly what his son was describing. So, it got to be to the point where Mark moved his family back to Arkansas, where they come from. They just, he decided, for pretty much these things weren't showing any actual aggression or anything, but, he was concerned about the safety of his children. And if you ever want another good interview, you might contact him. He does some podcasts sometime, and he could go very much in detail with all of that. And, Carrie Arnold has Bigfoot Odyssey.
Yeah, I know Carrie.
Yeah. Carrie came up there and did a very good documentary on Mark's property. And he interviews me in part of it as well. But Carrie and his friend Brad did an amazing job of documenting that, with Mark there on his property. They were very respectful and just super nice, So I'd highly recommend watching that. He's got that on the Bigfoot Odyssey YouTube channel. Very much worth watching.
Yeah, Carrie's an awesome dude. I'd love to have Mark on the show, so maybe we can work that out. I'd like to have him on to tell a story. And I think that's one of the things that people miss about this a lot of times. We get caught up in the stories, and shows like mine are entertaining, right? People like the stories,
Right.
They like the encounter stories, and it's entertainment for them. But what I think we lose sight of sometimes as people who do these kind of shows, and sometimes even researchers, these people are traumatized in so many different ways that they actually move off of their property. The listener that I had that reached out to me last week, he and his wife have a new baby, and they're having all this activity around, and they're pretty sure it's Bigfoot, and they're going to leave their family property and move to another area because he doesn't want his kid playing out, and he's afraid for her safety. So I think that's one of the things that people lose sight of often is, I don't think every one of these things are cold-blooded killers, but I think they have the propensity. They're no different than a bear or a large canid or whatever the case may be. Given the opportunity, you don't know what they're going to do. So when people have these kind of encounters, and they don't seek fame or fortune, they just want somebody to know and help them with the problem in a lot of cases. And then like you said, some of them pick up and move off their family property and relocate to other
Right.
states because of fear. And I think that's one of the things that we, as researchers and people that are into this, kind of need to be aware of. And like you said, like Carrie was, be very respectful of, because it is a traumatic
Right.
experience for a lot of these people.
Yeah, and that's I give credit where it's due, man. I was impressed, with the way Carrie interacted with all of us, and was just very unassuming. Let Mark tell his story. He didn't lead, and that's, you're talking about people who do podcasts and stuff. And I've done some podcasting this summer purely because it was just too darn hot to go out in the woods as much as I usually did, and I started doing a few of those. But I think the challenge with people like us that do a YouTube channel and such as that, people want to be entertained, and we want our stuff to be interesting, but you don't want to just, put crap out there that's just, if that makes sense. Keep it interesting, but keep it real, and in my point of view, this mystery is interesting enough without having to, whatever. Now you're talking about, when you said they're just like a bear or canid, you're talking about as far as their abilities if they wanted to hurt us, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'm talking size
Okay.
and just pure ability to take somebody out if they were given the opportunity.
Now, here's what I have found on my investigations. Let's look at it historically. In history, where you've had a Bigfoot or Bigfoots act aggressively, I mean, like tear things up, harm a person, whatever, there's one thing that those old cases have in common. They were shot or shot at first. Ape Canyon, Mount St. Helens, up to the point where one of these miners shot one of them and it fell over the top. The only interaction is they would see them watching them sometimes, curiosity. But when they shot one and it fell over that cliff that night, they tore the heck out of their cabin. Go back to the story that Teddy Roosevelt shared, the Bauman incident. This thing was coming up their camp, tearing stuff up. Up to that point, sounds like a bear, because bears do that, but then it come and stood in front of their lean-to one night, and bam, they shot at it, whatever. The next day when they're getting out of there, it kills one of them. So there was the firearms played in right there. I'm like you, that anytime you take something of that size, that stealth ability, obvious power, yeah, there is the possibility that it could do some damage. But one thing that I have said over and over again, if Bigfoot is out to get us, they're not very good at it. Because have I ever got creeped out in the woods? Yes, I have. July 30th of this year, the first day of the whole summer, down in the ladies, and I got off work at 2:00 and I made a beeline to the Kiamichi Mountains. Okay. And I'd spent the earlier part of the day before dark doing like, I like snakes, and there were these small holes of water full of cottonmouths, and I was videoing those. But it got closer to dark. I caught movement. Something moved down from me. My latest video that I just put out, you can see me there. The last part of that video is me shot, right at dusk, motioning my camera through the woods, trying to see if I can find anything. Didn't see it then, but I had a pretty foreboding feeling that whatever was there didn't want me there. And I realized that the camp that I was at, I was so far back in there, I could not get out of there in a hurry if I needed to. So I made my way down the mountain to a campsite that I could vacate quickly if I needed to. And it's funny because I was down there at the bottom campsite, and the cicadas and everything were chirping, doing all their things, crickets and all that stuff right before. And the best I can describe it, from the direction I came from, the silence came down toward me like a wave. Everything just going silent there. And I'm like, oh my gosh, there's something up there and it's coming down here. Of course, I never did see it. But when I got home, I snapped a bunch of pictures of the woods up there. And I'm not publishing the photos because they are blob squatches, but when I blow them up, they pixelate pretty well. But it looks like I got a picture of something's like head and neck as it's looking from behind a tree right down there where I saw the movement. And the pictures after that, it's not there of the same area. So there was something down there. But just telling a GoPro to take a picture from like 75 yards away through the trees, yeah, I just decided, I've let a few close friends look at it. I sent it to Kerry and he's like, yeah, it could be. And I'm like, yeah, it could be, but there's enough pictures of blob squatches on the internet. So I just put that away in my file. But due to the other things that were going on around that evening, I think there's a pretty good chance I did catch one, especially considering the area that it was at.
Let me ask you this. This is something that's always been on my mind when I'm similar to you. I think I'm into all kinds of cryptids. I don't really keep anything off the show. People's experiences are what they are. I've had one lady on that's had dogman experiences, and I've had other people that have seen things like a rake and UFOs and aliens and other things. But for you, what, as an investigator who seems to be approaching this from a very scientific approach, what do you make of these other cryptids like Dogman and some of the things that people are seeing out there? I mean, have you gotten those kind of reports? And do you think that those things are misidentifications, or what do you think about those?
Well, I'll just paint all of that with a really broad brush. And I'll include Bigfoot into this. There are misidentifications, whether it's, Bigfoot or whatever. There are people that just make up stuff, not as many as people might think, though. I would say the large majority of the people that have are sincere, in my opinion, comes away with they saw something. And if it wasn't a Bigfoot, it was a misidentification. Dogman, I honestly don't know what to make of that. I have, and this may be the lady you interviewed, I don't know. I've got a very good friend who has told me that she saw one time. But my opinion, a bipedal animal with a dog's head does not fall into the same category as like a Bigfoot. To me, that would fall more into the paranormal, because, and this is a term that I coined, okay? It's not, a dogman would not be a viable biological entity. That's not a natural occurring thing. So whatever that phenomenon is, I think that would fall into the paranormal. This is just my opinion, okay? And I don't disbelieve in the paranormal. It's just, that's not my area of expertise, I guess you would say. Now, I have talked to people who sincerely believe they saw a bipedal, hairy creature with a face like a wolf or something, So, and you've no doubt taken some of those too. Now, are they sincere? Yeah. But I have heard them that I know and stuff up too, but yeah, I think that leans very heavily going towards the paranormal. And even one of the reports I got of these, the way it's described, it very much leans into the paranormal aspect. Now, moving past that, because I really don't look into the dogman thing. But you were talking about rakes and things like that. I have received some very compelling reports from matter of fact, one of these reports that I know these people saw something took place about, as the crow flies, about 2 miles from where I'm sitting here. And this was, and go another 10 miles to the north of there. Other people had 2 encounters with something that resembled this. And this one that happened just real close to my home here, dogs were barking. It was night. Across the road from their house, there's a pasture. Then there's a creek with thick woods there. Dogs were over there barking at something. They got up and something jumped up out of that brush and ran deeper in the woods. Now, what they described was that it was kind of a white glowing entity that was humanoid, not, they didn't say it was really big. They said, oh, about like a regular person. But and of course they thought it was an alien or something like that. It's the only thing that, they were younger people at the time, but they still, one of them talked to my son just here the other day and said, do you remember that? And of course my son did not see that, but he remembers them telling us about it back then, and they still stick to that story. So what was that? Go back. This would have taken place probably about 12, 13 years ago. Go back another 10 years down further north of here. There's a little patch of hills. We call them mountains here, but they're not that big. But a couple of people were parking down there, a couple of people on a date, right? And they saw something that resembled this same thing by description standing in the woods. But when they locked eyes on it, they said it was a flash and it disappeared. So those are the really strange encounter things that I have gotten. And then there was another one in that same area of a couple of teenagers, one of them being my son, that observed a tall figure standing at the edge of those same woods down there. And him and his cousin both saw it. And that would have been back when he was, I think he said he was about 14 at the time. And I didn't know anything about it. They didn't tell us about it. I found out about it when he and I went camping this May, right before it got real hot. We were camping in that same location, and we were walking at the edge of the woods with a camera with night vision on it. And he told me about that. I said, why did you not tell me about that back then? And he's like, well, we just thought y'all would think we were making it up, and he's 26 now, and I said, that's interesting, So what was that? Have you received any reports of anything resembling anything like that?
I have. I had a listener that reached out to me a while back. He had some Bigfoot encounters when he was a kid. And I do a paranormal show in addition to this one. I do 3 podcasts. I do this one, the paranormal, and the true crime show. And Daniel reached out to me and said, I had this thing when, I saw this rake, is the best thing he could describe it. This tall, like alien sort of cylindrical. I don't even know how to describe what he talked about. It's on the show. You guys can go back and check out the episode. But it's just really strange. And he's this is a former military guy, I believe him. I watched him tell his story on video, and he has no reason to make this up. And he's like, I don't know what it is. He's riding a 4-wheeler by this like abandoned cabin outside his friend's house, and this thing's staring out the window at him. And then they had an incident where it was looking in the window of the house. And I don't know what to make of it. I've had Lon Strickland on the show, and Lon is getting all these reports of these winged humanoid creatures like Mothman, up in Chicago, in the Chicago area, and hundreds. I think he's up to like 140 something reports of this thing. And I'm like, Lon, what is it? And they're, they think it's something that may be interdimensional. There's some kind of portal opened up and they're communicating with it. He's got people on his team that are sort of connecting to this thing telepathically. And it's just this weird onion that you start unfolding, and there's so many more layers to it. I don't know what to make of it. I think it's fascinating, but I'm kind of a nuts and bolts kind of guy, and it's hard for me to wrap my brain around. And I've said it tons of times about like dog man. It just, you put it a lot more eloquently with your statement. I just say it doesn't compute for me. There's not a box I can check that puts dog man in any form of something that I can say is reality, because we're really talking about a werewolf, right? We're talking about basically a half man, half wolf here. And it exists in the movies. I've seen that, but I don't discredit these people that have claimed to have had some sort of encounter. And I've said it so many times on the show. I think there probably a couple have squeaked by, but I don't have anybody on my show that I don't believes that they've seen or had an experience with something they can't explain. Now, what that is, maybe a misidentification, maybe it was something else, that I don't know. But those kind of stories about winged hominoids and dogman, and it's really fascinating. I just don't know what to make of it. Well, I don't really know what to make of the Bigfoot thing either.
Yeah, right. But the Bigfoot is very feasible, I think, compared to some of these other things. But still, it's like this. And, we talked a little bit before the show. You were a police officer for several years. I was in a part-time capacity as well. Now, there was a time, and I won't name any organizations that did this, but like if you were doing a Bigfoot report to some people back then, if there was any part of that report that did not fit their category, they would do that away. And I said this on a podcast the other night. I said, how would you like it if you had some kind of domestic incident and the police officer comes up to take your report and you get to one part of it, that officer says, you know what, I don't believe in that stuff, so we'll just leave that out of it. That's not an honest investigation. So if you and I are taking reports of a Bigfoot or these whatever their entities are, to me, my job is to take that report just as that person remembers it or presents it out. Then I can take it through that interview and I can make my own mind up whether A, do I believe him? B, is it really what he thought it was, or is he misidentification, or is it a misidentification? But an honest investigator, I think we have to take those reports in its entirety and not re-blend them to fit our narrative. Now, on the, what we were just referring to as like a rake or something, I have no idea what to make of that. Because that just is so above and beyond. Yet my son saw one, and I know beyond doubt if he said he saw it, he saw it. What it was, I have no idea. The other people that reported that too, they did see something, but I'm not even going to pretend to know what that was.
Yeah, I'm the same way. And I've approached this show since day one. I'm 200 plus episodes into this show, and people give me crap they send me emails and they do reviews and say, how could you have that person on? They're clearly lying. It's clearly made up. They didn't see that. It's too fantastical. And I'm like, I can't with any intellectual honesty say that, because if I wasn't there and I don't have proof that they're telling me a lie and I believe that they're being sincere, that's the way I present it on the show. And the people that are listening, they make up their own mind. It's like, take what you want and leave the rest kind of thing. But I'm going to put it out there as it is, unfiltered, for people to make up their own minds, because I have to do the same thing. And sometimes I walk away from episodes and I've interviewed people and I just scratch my head and say, I don't know what to believe. But I believe that person had a true encounter with something. So at the end of the day, that's what it's really all about. We talked about it a couple of times. Let's get it in there. Let's talk about, I know you've written at least 2 books. Let's talk about your books and your YouTube page, and tell everybody where they can find that and where's your stuff at on YouTube.
Okay. Now my YouTube channel is Bigfoot and More. Okay. I've got, I don't know, over 100 videos on there. Some of them are podcasts, which that's not my main thing. I did several podcasts this summer because, like I told you earlier, it's just too darn hot to go out in the woods too much. So I started doing some interviews. Some of them are sighting reports that I've gotten from people that have given me permission to share with that. Some of them are just are me going out into the field and camping and such as that. some of them are just camping trips. I put them up there anyway because I get, emails from some people said, hey, we like to see the trip to the woods, whether you see anything or not or find anything. So I thought, okay. So anyway, that's Bigfoot and more. Check that out. As far as books, I've got two of them. My first book, right there, you can see it right. It's called The Champay, and the Champay is a Bigfoot type monster in a native Choctaw legend. That is, they don't call it a Bigfoot because it's an old legend, but they're describing a Bigfoot with a very bad attitude toward people that'll actually eat people. So what I did the research on the creature itself and tied it into the Bigfoot legend and set the story in the mountains of southeast Oklahoma. And that's called The Champay, and that's available on Amazon. Published that a couple of years ago. And my latest one is this one. Grief, camera's not out front. Kiamichi Bigfoot, Investigating the Oklahoma Sasquatch. And this one is doing really well for me on Amazon. The cover right there, if you can see it, I actually took that picture myself down there in the Kiamichi Mountains. One morning I woke up, went down to the creek and looked up and seen the fog coming down the valley there. And I took that picture and I thought, man, that picture ought to be good for something. And I used it for the book cover. But this book goes into depth on some of the things we've talked about tonight. It has some pictures in it. And just basically my investigation into the Sasquatch mystery in Oklahoma. And there is Oklahoma. And I believe this is the first book that's specifically deals with Bigfoot in Oklahoma. The first one to be published. Now there's another one that just came out, which I ordered it because I heard my name's mentioned in it and wanted to just see what they said. But it's called Valley of the Apes, and it came out in like a couple of months after I released this one. And it's about a group that investigated in an area called Area X. Have you heard that?
In Oklahoma? Had Kathy Straight and some of the folks on that have been out investigating in Area X for a while.
Okay. I was the first Bigfoot researcher to step foot in Area X. Followed by that, and I think the first trip down there, I had asked a retired forestry worker there at Honubby. Actually, I said, hey, if you wanted to find a Bigfoot around here, where do you think the best place to look was? And he named this area. Of course, it's not called Area X. It's a wildlife preserve is what it is. And I had no idea how to get there. And if I'd have tried, I'd have got lost down there. But I found a gentleman in town. I can't remember his name, but he led me down in there. And there's a couple of, at the time, there were a couple of cabins down there. One was a 2-story cabin somebody built. The other was an older one that nestled right up next to the edge of the mountain. But this was in this like 1999 or so. Remember the Y2K thing? Everybody thought, that the apocalypse was going to happen. Jesus was going to come back and all this stuff because, apparently if a computer quit, Jesus would have to come back and fix it or so. I don't remember what the deal was, but I don't know. Do you remember that time, how crazy that was? But anyway, some people had actually gone down there and started to build some cabins because it was so remote so they could escape the Antichrist or whatever, that was going to come after them. But anyhow, it seems silly now, but at that time, there were a lot of people that were in a panic. But anyway, went down there and looked at that. There's a chapter on that. And there's a picture in my book of me sitting on top of a tin roof of one of those cabins. And all you see of me, it's one of those 35 millimeter cameras, and it's dark. And you could see my leg and my boot and then the dark woods under that cabin. I'd climbed up on that roof and was listening to something moving around in the woods down there. Something landed on the tin beside me. And I thought, well, it's an acorn falling off. And I looked down, and it was a little piece of gravel. And I'm like, that's odd. And after a little bit, another one hit. Something was down there throwing these little pieces of gravel from the woods up there onto that tin. That would have been in 2000 or 2001, right in that area, right there. Never did see what was doing it. Now, the gentleman named Alton Higgins, which I'd mentioned earlier, he and I went down not too long after that, and we found, and during this time, it was a pretty heavy drought. Everything was very dry, but we did find an old footprint in the dried up mud there that was about 15 inches long in there. And even he was a wildlife biologist. And I said, well, what do you think the chances of that actually being a Bigfoot are? And he said, oh, I'd say probably about 85%. And I said, well, that's pretty good, So, but after that, I haven't been down to that area in a very long time. I heard that the route that we took down in there, you can't go that way anymore. You've got to go a different route in. Now, what's the name of the guy? I'm supposed to. He's wanting me to email him wanting me to send him a copy of my book. You probably know him. He wrote Valley of the Apes. Michael Mays.
Yeah, Michael Mays.
Yeah, I've got him on Messenger here. He's wanting me to send him a copy of my books, and I ordered one of his. But him and some other people had been, I guess, doing some more extensive investigation down into there. I think he's the one that went down there with Rob Lowe, isn't he?
I do
The movie
believe
star
so.
Rob Lowe?
Yeah, who's pretty much a lot of people don't know, but he's kind of into Bigfoot. So I've been trying to get him on the show. He's not easy to get on the show. So
He's the most famous person I've got on my show. I got to interview Ron Moorhead here a few weeks ago and had a good visit with him. Those Sierra sounds are quite fascinating.
Oh yeah, Ron's
Very
a good dude. I had him on last year. He was probably
nice guy.
Yeah, one of the nicest people in Bigfoot for sure. And I got to hang out with him at the Smoky Mountain Bigfoot Conference last year. It was a blast.
Yeah, I'd like to meet him in person. But I remember I heard about, the Sierra sounds back when I was a kid when the Mysterious Monsters came out. And I remember hearing that on that, that show. And to get to interview the guy that was one of the guys that recorded that was just a real treat. And he was really nice. And I told him, I said, man, you are fearless about where he'll go with the research wherever he believes it's going, and he's really colored outside the box, on some of that. And he's got some interesting views, and he's been all over the place, so I'd like to just sit down and talk to that guy again sometime.
Yeah, he moved out here. He's in North Carolina, so we're going to cross paths later on this year at a couple of events, hopefully.
Yeah, I sent him a copy of my book, North Carolina. But what else you want to know? I've got enough stuff I can.
I know. I think we could probably go for another 2 hours.
Right.
But we can close it out there. Let me get back into the pod. I was into talking about Ron Moorhead mode, so I got to get back in podcaster mode to do my professional close.
Yeah.
Well, David Wilbanks, thanks so much for coming on the show, man. Everybody go over to the show notes. I'll have links to the books in there, and I'll have links to the YouTube page. You guys go check it out. David Wilbanks, it's been an honor and a pleasure to have you on the show, man. I really appreciate you coming on.
Hey, I enjoyed it, and thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely.
They say you don't gotta go home, but you can't stay here. And no, I don't wanna be alone in the world out there. Hide from me.